All right, in Matthew chapter 13, Jesus begins telling a series of parables. And we in chapter 13 hear parable after parable after parable that Jesus is just out and he's traveling and he's meeting people. And there's reason to believe this is all happening outside of the synagogue. And even the disciples are kind of confused. And it says in verse 10, the disciples came to Jesus and asked, "Why do you speak to the people in parables?" And he replied, "The knowledge of the secrets of the kingdom of heaven has been given to you, but not to them. Whoever has will be given more, and he will have an abundance. And whoever does not have even what he has will be taken from him. And this is why I speak to them in parables." And it's wild because it's confusing a little bit that he would tell these stories that people weren't meant to understand and that he doesn't give them the answers to. And yet that's how he spoke to people, especially outside of the synagogue. And I think that's interesting because we live in a day and an age where we have our sermons inside the church, right? But we can make them available online, and we can make audio versions of our sermons, and we can make videos of our sermons. And so we can share those widely. And I think that we've started to kind of lean into this way of sermonizing people outside of the church. Like we make movies that are mini sermons, and we tell stories in books, and we kind of like slip sermons into them. But that's not at all what Jesus was doing. He was just telling stories. And he was telling stories that had meaning and that had purpose and that had truth in them. But they were stories that people were going to have to go home and think about. And they were going to have to ask questions, and they were going to have to dig a little deeper to try to understand. And my husband and I make video games, actually, and we make Christian video games, I guess, but we don't really make them for Christians. We make video games just for people in the world. And so this idea of speaking to people through parable is a beautiful idea for how you talk to people about things that are beautiful and true, and you create a story that matters, and you tell a good story. You tell a story with truth in it. And then you let people come to you and ask you, what did that mean? And why did you do it this way? And what were you trying to say when you said this? And that's what we've experienced as we've created video games, is that if we create things that to us have a parable in them, have a story that points to Jesus, that points to the kingdom of heaven, that points to the love of God, we can trust that eventually people will come and say, "Why'd you do it that way? What did that mean?" And then we can kind of unpack those things for people. And that's what Jesus did, although he chose who and when to unpack things with. But to me, the parables are exciting because they point to a way of speaking to people outside of the church, a way of reaching them and telling them stories and intriguing them and making them think and making them dig deeper a little bit. So that's what was interesting to me in Matthew chapter 13. I would have loved to unpack all of the parables one by one, but I just didn't have time in this video. So if you want to unpack the parables and something that maybe surprised you in it, or some insight you didn't have before that now you do, the comments would be a wonderful place for everyone to just start looking at each of those parables individually. And read Matthew chapter 14 sometime tonight or tomorrow morning, and then catch the video on Matthew chapter 14 tomorrow.